All right, welcome back to the Canadian Gun Vault Behind the Vault Door. My name is Mark Morelli. I'll be your host for today's podcast. I'm here with DJ, who has been brought to my attention. He's a real World War I and World War II rifle aficionado. Just looking through some of his gear, he's got some fantastic stuff. DJ, great to have you here on the show. Right, thanks for joining us today. Can you walk us through some of your guns? Because you know what, I'm here looking at this collection, and I'm thinking, what a fantastic set. What have you got here?
So we've got a 1918 Lee Enfield SMLE. We've got a 1916 SMLE with a magazine cutoff and a round cocking piece on the end. Then we have a British-made 1943 number 4 Mark I, a number 4 Mark I Star by Savage, Canadian issue. Then we have a number 4 Mark I Star by Long Branch, another one exactly the same, and another one. They are all 1943. Over here we've got the 1972 Enfield Sergeant's pattern.
Okay, you know
Snyder Enfield.
Like I'm gonna stop you right there, because one thing jumps out at me right away is what I'm looking at, and for the people that are just joining us now and aren't too familiar with firearms. We've got a series of Lee Enfield rifles. So I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 examples of Lee Enfield pattern rifles. So these are bolt-action rifles that would have been used during World War I, World War II, and long after. And they're really a collectible item today. I remember when they were being sold for about $99 in the stores here in Canada in the early 90s, and guys were chopping up the stocks and making cheap moose guns out of them. But we've got 7 examples of essentially the same rifle. And the argument has come up lately, and I've heard this from a few people. Why would you possibly need to have more than one gun or more than one type of gun? To have 7 examples of the same gun. I mean, there are people that would probably try and wrap their mind around that for a minute and say, well, what's the point? I'm going to argue that they're very collectible. I'm going to argue that they're very different. And there's differences between the models that make them unique. And in their own right, you could have an entire collection of Lee Enfields. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so
I can go through. I'll start with the SMLE, so short magazine Lee Enfield rifles.
Yep.
We'll start with 1916 since that's the earliest I've got here. So basically, on this one, you've got a round cocking piece, which I personally think is really easy to grab and hold on to if you want to half cock the rifle, battle safe it.
Yep.
You can't fire it. You don't have to switch your safety on, but if someone comes over the top of your trench coming at you, it's a quick click and bang.
Yeah.
You've then got a magazine cutoff, which allows you to single load it and still have a full magazine of 10. So again, if you're surprised and attacked, you can flick that right open and just go to town. And as you know, these rifles, you can fire them real fast if you're well trained. And the British, Canadians, they were well trained back then. They had a real professional army at the beginning.
So you've got the probably some of the earliest versions of this rifle at this end of the rack, and I mean they've got that beautiful full stock that goes right to the end of the barrel that so many collectors find really desirable, and you got some differences in terms of design. Some of the earlier designs had obviously some cues that were a little bit different in terms of their aesthetic, the way that they operate. All these guns were designed to be fired very quickly. I've heard of the Mad Minute, seems to be the thing that people talk about. Being able to fire this gun quickly with 10 rounds, which would have been a few more than, the
standard 5 of a Mauser.
Yeah, like a lot of guns from that period would have only had 5 or, maybe even 8, in the years that came afterwards. But, the Lee Enfield rifle really was the assault rifle of its day. And with a 10-round detachable box magazine, the ability to fire something that would, cock on close or open?
Yep, cock on close.
Cock on close. So you got a rifle that would fire very quickly, that could be shouldered and fired, very, very, very fast in rapid succession compared to other guns, and have a larger magazine capacity than some of the other rifles of its day. So this would have definitely been the type of rifle that people would have probably enjoyed having out there in the field during World War I.
Yeah, so the Canadians went in with the Ross rifle, and due to the mud and everything of the trenches, they started adopting the Lee Enfield, which has a bit of a wider chamber. Yeah. So any dirt and grime in there, it's kind of a little more forgiving on that. Yep. It also does have 10 rounds, and it fires real fast. There's a story of the Battle of Mons, I believe it is, in 1914, or right at the beginning of the war, where the BEF went against the German army, and they were really outnumbered. I think it was like 5-1, and they just mowed them down. And the Germans thought they were facing a machine gun company, but it was just a company of professional British soldiers just volley firing these Enfields, and just mowing them down.
So with the 10-round magazine capacities and with the correct technique that the Canadians and the British were using, you could really put up a real wall of lead back then compared to it was so much so that it was being compared to machine gun fire, which that's incredible. Like moving down the line now, I want to know about some of the differences here. So we've got some of the earliest versions of this rifle on the end, and then as you go on, I got to tell you, I'm seeing some bayonets on the end of the earliest ones. They're considerably larger than some of the ones that followed. Like there's a bayonet here, folks, in front of me that looks like it's damn near 1.5 feet long.
It's 17.5 inches long.
Okay.
Of steel.
Yep.
Sharpened. On the end of this rifle, it works real well because they did shorten these SMLEs.
Yes.
Compared to their predecessor before them.
Yeah.
They shortened it because the cavalry had a smaller rifle and the infantry had a longer rifle.
Okay.
The cavalry felt kind of threatened when they were just going to make an intermediate rifle, and the infantry thought they were going to lose accuracy.
Okay.
Turns out they were both wrong. It worked perfectly fine, and they were eventually very happy with it.
Okay.
The bayonet, though, since this is a shorter rifle than your standard Gewehr 98, you need that extra reach. Yes. Otherwise, your enemy's got the advantage. So this long bayonet helped in an open field.
Yeah.
But coming into a trench, this started to become kind of a hassle as far as I'm aware.
A little bit too long?
Yeah, a little bit too long and not very maneuverable. But you can imagine a little bit better than, again, the German rifle, which was a lot longer.
Okay.
So the other use for these is you can take this off and it's practically a short sword.
Really? Yeah. I could see that. It's a fairly long unit compared to some of the ones that followed. You can definitely kind of see the advancements and the adjustments that governments were making, I guess, as they produced these rifles and they were being used. I mean, strategically, once you get into the trenches, using something a little bit shorter that might manage its way around through dark corners a little bit better would probably be preferable to something much longer in an open field environment. And really, when it comes down to it, governments are going to fabricate rifles that best help their troops survive, given whatever circumstances they may face out in the field. So you can see that there's some changes already from the earliest rifles till the ones that come afterwards. So moving right along down to these next examples, what have we got going on over here?
So now we're getting into World War II here.
Okay.
Where you've got a spike bayonet.
Okay.
It's a lot smaller.
Yeah, I see
about
that.
5-6 inches.
Yep.
It looks like a sausage sticker.
Yeah.
And got a nickname, something along those lines.
Okay.
The troops, as far as I know, really didn't like this because you can only thrust and stab with this.
Yes.
Whereas they liked how small it was, but you couldn't slash, whereas you could with the World War I bayonet, more of a sword style.
Yep.
You can slash. It's got a bit more uses. You could use it as a knife to cut whatever you needed. This basically only had really one use.
Okay, yeah. And it affixes right to the guns a little bit differently, I noticed too.
Yeah, you turn it on and it's got a small button and it just clicks.
Yeah,
it twists to the left.
It twists in. All right, that's pretty interesting. So we keep on moving along now. I'm going to pull this one out of the rack here, and I got to tell you folks, terrific collection DJ's got here. I mean, I've seen some Lee Enfield collections, and he's got some fantastic examples. I mean, the character marks that are in the stocks are beautiful. I can see that you've finished some of these guns, and some of them you haven't. But wonderful examples of a really great rifle. So what do you got going on here with this one?
So this is a Savage-made, U.S. property marked number 4 Mark I Star. So the difference is in the number 1 Mark I versus the Mark I Star is you open the bolt and you slide it back a little bit on the Star to pop it out. This is a lot easier to manufacture than on the number 1 where you have just a small little depression at the back. A little less time consuming.
Okay,
so easier to produce.
Okay, so you've got cost cutting measures, right? Going on with the fabrication of these rifles. They started to make them a little bit easier to produce. I'm sure there was a huge demand for these kind of rifles to get out the door and get into soldiers' hands to fight the good fight. So you've got some changes now, in the design that extend beyond, ensuring troops' survival. Now you're getting into, making the expense a little more cost effective. Right? Again, though, you can really see, some changes to the rifle. That full length stock that goes all the way to the end of the barrel looks like it's been shortened up a little bit, and the look of the rifle is starting to change. So I mean, for people that collect these sort of things, not only are they changing technologically, and in design, but they're also aesthetically starting to, you know, change a little bit. And really, I'm starting to see, you know, why people get into these, you know, seeing what you got here on the rack. So let's move right along down here to the next set. And, you know, like now we're talking a change from, you know, the 1918s to now we're going to get into the 40s series of rifles. 43. So why don't you pull one of those out for a second? I'm really curious to know, like, if you got a favorite in there, pull one out and maybe share some of the different features of it with us.
So a big difference is, like you said, it is a little bit shorter, but the barrel is exposed at the end.
Yes.
But what they did do was they made it a peep sight.
Okay.
So instead of the iron sight being in the middle, you got a lot more eye relief here.
Okay.
It makes it a lot easier and a lot more accurate, I find.
Okay, so you got the position of the rear sight changing on the rifle, you know, increasing kind of the
accuracy of
the rifle by increasing the distance between the front and rear sights. You know, so now we're getting into, you know, improving the accuracy of a rifle like this, which I'm told a lot of these rifles really weren't producing groups any better than about 3 to 4 inches at 100 yards. Is that about right or no?
Yep.
Okay.
This is not a Mauser. A Mauser is going to be accurate. The saying, I believe, goes, the Germans brought a hunting rifle, the British brought a battle rifle, and the Russians brought a rifle.
A rifle. Okay, so you got different approaches, right, to combat, and you know, rifles being used during World War I and World War II. Certainly, they wanted to bump out a lot of numbers. I've fired, you know, Mausers before. They are pinpoint accurate. The sights kind of give you an indication of, you know, what they're capable of. They have these little pinprick, you know, sights that you could tell are really designed for accuracy. Whereas the Lee Enfields were more, I think, less designed to put out volume of fire and to really get into the mix and get things done with a few extra rounds compared to what was available at the time. And clearly, they've, you know, abbreviated some of the production techniques to put more rifles out the door and get them into more people's hands. I mean, there's definitely two different philosophies on rifle use. Really cool.
Two different styles of arms.
And now you had mentioned that the other one was a Savage made gun. So, like, I mean, there's Lee Enfields, and then there's some other production guns that use the same design. Different companies were producing these.
Yeah, so you got, of course, England's making them.
Yes.
And then you've got Long Branch that starts.
Okay.
Now, they started in World War II.
And Long Branch, just for our listeners, is going to be Canadian. Ontario,
yes.
Canada. So right here in our own backyard, folks, we produced a lot of rifles, right, for the war effort. Definitely Canadians saw these rifles being used, and there still are. For a lot of collectors out there that are, you know, trying to search for a Lee Enfield, a good example of a Lee Enfield. Ontario is really a home, home for these rifles. A lot of these rifles found their way into, you know, private hands. You know, after the war, they were brought back. A lot of people, you know, managed to get these rifles because they were produced right here in our backyard. Really something that we as Canadians can be proud of, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can find lots of these at gun shows, and even if they're a sporter, like, don't just glance at it and walk by it. If it can still be refurbished, back to its original state. You can still find unissued or issued wood online from England, from the States, from out west in Canada, all over the place. If it's got a full-length barrel and this is what you want, you can bring this gun back to its original glory.
Awesome.
Don't pass up on it. It's a good bonding experience with you, your son, or your father, whoever you want to do it with, or just yourself. You'll learn a lot about your rifle doing that.
It's a lot like, to me, the way you describe it sounds to me like building classic cars, you know, or taking the time to rebuild a motorcycle engine on a vintage bike. I mean, for a lot of people, folks, learning about rifles, using the rifles, collecting the rifles, you know, it really is about appreciating, you know, the firearms, the history, the technological advancements. There's so many different things, you know, aspects to the firearm community and to the appreciation for guns that I think everybody you know, should try and understand. For some people, collecting firearms is just like, you know, collecting classic cars, you know, or collecting, you know, stamps. It just so happens that some people have taken interest in firearms and they really do enjoy, you know, collecting them and using them and, you know, appreciating them for what they are, which are, you know, bona fide pieces of, you know, history that you can actually use. You know, So I'm really enjoying this trip down history lane here. Now, if we move along to this one, I noticed this one's much lighter in terms of its color.
Yeah, so this one is a Long Branch, but as I just said, this one was sporterized. I bought a complete set of wood from England, so it is English wood.
And what would that cost you to buy the complete set of wood? Because I'm going to explain something to our viewers in a second.
The one online buyer that I know of that has a lot, I believe his name is Dean154 something.
Okay.
You can find him on eBay quite easily.
Yeah.
It costs about $250, $300 to get a complete set. Now
Yep.
I'm talking like out of the box, never been sanded. You have to sand this to fit your rifle.
Okay.
You have to oil this.
Yep.
You have to chisel away at the buttstock to fit it in if it's not going to fit.
All right, so you're going to be.
It takes a lot of time.
You're going to be fitting your rifle, folks. You're going to be doing a little bit of staining and sanding, right? Yeah, it's going to get personal. You're going to put some sweat into it.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
Appreciate it a lot more. After.
And for the listeners that don't know what sporterizing is, these rifles were military surplus. They were offered up to the public. I know certainly they were. They've been around as early as the 80s and 90s. They would come in like these barrels and in these batches where people would go through them. And I mean, it was a .303 rifle, and they weren't really recognized as a bona fide collectible when I was young in the 90s. And so people were chopping these beautiful, long, full-length stocks, and realistically, they were damaging the collectability and the originality of the pieces. But what you're talking about now, DJ is referring to now, is there are people that make available to you stock kits that can return the guns to their original state and restore some of that originality that people really seem to love these days. And for all those people out there that want to feel a real connection to the past and see these guns looking like they should, that's a terrific option. And I mean, obviously, you've taken advantage of it here. I've seen a couple that you've done, and you've done a great job with them. All right, well, you know what? I got to tell you, I can't help but notice this one is just kind of popping out at me. There appears to be, folks, for all you Mosin Nagant lovers out there, for the listeners that don't know what it is, it's the Russian rifle. That would have been their standard battle rifle. The Nagant rifle fires a 7.62 by 54 cartridge, which I believe has been referred to as the Russian 30-06. It saw use for quite some time. When would the Nagant rifle, been in service for? Just not this one, but like the basic Nagant rifle has been around since when?
I believe they brought them out in 1891, if I'm correct.
Okay.
So they served through World War I. A little bit of a different model. This one's the 9130, so the 91 model, but remade in 1930.
Okay, and this Mosin Nagant rifle is a bolt-action rifle, folks, that fires this very powerful cartridge. There's still a good supply of surplus ammo kicking around, Chinese, Russian, kicking around at a pretty reasonable price. It's a pretty powerful rifle, and much like the Lee Enfields of 25 years ago, I think that this rifle is completely under-recognized as a bona fide collectible. World War I, World War II, this rifle got used by the Russian. It fought for freedom. The example, though, that DJ has in front of me here, though, is a very special one. It is the one that I refer to as the PU Sniper. And for those of you that are Jude Law fans and or spent any amount of time in the theaters and remember Enemy at the Gates, right? Jude Law carried this rifle, and it was the sniper rifle that was used during World War II. And it has this beautiful, scope mount on it that looks like it was made in a garage, quite honestly. The Russians have some fantastic designs, folks, but they are really rough and unpolished in many respects. But you could drive a tank over them, and they would still work in just about any weather conditions. And that's what I appreciate about them, is they function. And so tell us a little bit about this rifle, because you've got it done up a little bit, and I'm loving what you're doing here, and I definitely want to have this done to one of mine. What do you got going on here?
So I've completely wrapped the scope, so you can still use the dials for your windage and your elevation. I've left those just exposed. The rest has been burlapped.
Yeah.
I left the receiver and the mag and the action obviously open. But I've gone down as far as I can with burlap. I've left the iron sight just exposed enough that it's set at 200 meters, because if your scope goes down, the reason this is so high is partially you can open the bolt.
Yes.
You need it high to open the bolt.
Yes.
Then again, your scope goes down. You can go right under this and use your iron sight. So I've got it set for 200. As if I was back in that day, this is what I would personally do. This is the way I've done my rifle. As how would I be able to use this? Like, camouflage it, and what would I cover, what would I leave exposed, what would you need?
You really have done a terrific job of replicating some of the things I've seen in some classic photography that was taken from the time period. I mean, I'm thinking back to the 40s, and I'm looking at this rifle, and the way you've got it set up, definitely this would blend in certain environments fairly well. It would definitely be easy to grab onto it. If you see the burlap, folks, I mean, it rides along the full length of the stock pretty much that you would grab grab onto. It's really easy to get a positive kind of feel and grab this rifle and not, you know, lose your grip on it. I mean, if this thing got wet, I would still feel pretty confident that I could hold on to it. And the scope is wrapped beautifully, but you can still access all the windage and elevation adjustments, and the rear sight is still exposed, so that if for whatever reason, you know, your scope got smashed and you no longer had access to the optic, you would still be able to use the iron sights. I mean, this is a working man's gun. Like, I mean, the way you got this set up, this would be ready to go. If you were in battle, this would be the type of rifle that you would carry in that time period, and you would feel pretty confident that you'd be able to use this effectively in just about all conditions.
Like you said before, like, they're really rough made. I'm not gonna lie. This thing, the buttstock, it kicks your shoulder. It is not made for comfort. It's made to bash things in.
Absolutely.
The bayonet for it's crude. The scope mount's crude, like you said. It looks like it was thrown together in someone's garage, but you can bash this off a tree. You can take this to Siberia. You can take this anywhere, and it's gonna work.
It's gonna function. I know that the Germans had some difficulties at certain points in history where their firearms, the tolerances were so tight on some guns that they wouldn't work in the same kind of weather conditions that, say, perhaps the Russian designs could. I noticed that over the years I've encountered a lot of, you know, Russian designs like Tokharovs and Makarovs, and the tolerances are a lot more loose. And what that does, folks, is it allows the metal to kind of float freely and to have, you know, the ability to have it run in, you know, dirty environments or really cold environments, or if it got wet, you know, to have a rifle that would still function if it got wet and then, you know, froze up a little bit. You know, bang the thing against the side of a wall, and you're back in action.
Yeah, so even on your standard infantry model, like your trigger guard is really big. You can fit winter gloves in there.
Yeah.
Your bolt is straight. You can bang that with winter gloves. That was a big problem for the K98, getting your hand under there with winter gloves, freezing in Stalingrad.
Yeah.
One of my very good friends from school, his grandfather was in Stalingrad, and the winter was hell for him. Absolute hell. He didn't have enough cold gear, and what he did have, he couldn't use because he couldn't use his rifle with it.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that a lot of troops were not prepared to deal with the kind of weather conditions and environmental conditions that the Russians were. But the Russians were, and, you know, mad respect to the Russian people. They're tough people, and they were prepared to fight for freedom, right, in the worst of weather and battle conditions, and they did quite well. Their designs were made, right, to operate in those kind of conditions. Looking, just like you said, the trigger guard has got this large space. It's clearly designed to be used with, you know, gloved hands, whereas, you know, German manufacturers were looking at target rifles, and they were operating under more ideal weather conditions when they were making those things and using those things ordinarily. So they ran into some difficulties where the Russians did not.
Yeah, well, Germans are known for precise engineering, and they would not let anything as crude as this leave the plant.
No.
It would just eat them alive.
Yeah. Well, you know,
sometimes you need that.
Well, you know what? Mosin Nagants certainly have risen in value in the last few years. I think that the surplus is starting to dry up. I would be amiss, folks, if I didn't talk to you about, you know, the collectability of these pieces just a little bit more. A lot of people see them as cheap rifles. They're inexpensive, perhaps, but not cheap. The designs are rough and unpolished, but they're not garbage. They work. And so for the people who have gone out there and they've paid, you know, the money they have for these rifles, I can assure you that within 5 or 10 years' time, you're going to see a gradual climb in the prices. I know I've seen it with the PU snipers, and now I'm starting to see it with the standard, you know, versions of these rifles. And they definitely are, in my mind anyway, a terrifically underrated collectible piece.
Oh, yeah. Most people complain about the bolt, but if you take it apart and you give it a little bit of work, like if you take this gun apart and look at it, the only things that really, I mean, the bolt is stiff, but you can ease that up a lot just by smoothing it out. You can see where they manufactured. You can see that it's not as smooth as, whereas you look at an Enfield, they've grinded it out, and then they've went and taken the time and smoothed it out.
Yeah.
If you do that to your Mosin, you're putting the time and care that they just didn't have.
Yes.
They just needed to pump them out.
Yeah, and I've seen that with, you know, several designs over the years, that if you take a little bit of time, put in a little bit of elbow grease, that you can really, you know, clean up a rifle's use and make it a lot more user-friendly and easy to use. You know, I got to tell you, DJ, you've done a fantastic thing for us here by being part of this interview. I can tell, really, that you have a clear appreciation for history connected to these rifles, and, you know, it's just an absolute pleasure to meet you, young man. I'm looking forward to having you again on the show someday. Right? Thank you so much for coming out. No, thank you. You take care of yourself. Well, folks, that's about all the time we have today for the Canadian Gun Vaults Behind the Vault Door. We hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to us on YouTube and watch us on Instagram. We're doing some fantastic things for the firearm community, and we're meeting a lot of great people. Thank you again, and have a great night.